GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The BBC was lightly fricasseed today by the Culture Committee in Parliament, but Tim Davie left slightly warmer than a cucumber, but not seriously discombobulated. However, is the BBC as we know it coming to an end? Ministers are reportedly considering a formal review of its funding model as new figures reveal TV licence holders are down by 500,000 in the past year. Is it time the public service broadcaster felt the brute force of the free market, freed from the comfort blanket of the licence fee? The scandal of wrongful convictions of postmasters up and down the country sees a new development with the publication of a report criticising the shortcomings in the compensation scheme for victims of the post office scandal. I will be joined by one of those unjustly imprisoned to give us her view on the latest events. The departing Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has argued for quality over quantity in Britain's armed forces, but this has coincided with a damning new defence procurement report which has attacked the system's bureaucracy and ponderousness. Member of the inquiry team, Mark Francois, joins me shortly. Is it time we ended the aesthetic and functional tyranny of Britain's carbuncular cycle lanes? Well, a new Conservative coalition set to win the next Spanish election this weekend is campaigning to support the motorist. The Tories should do the same and show their resolve by using the government's powers to abolish the ULEZ immediately. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a rather theatrical panel this evening, the Industrial in Action degree-holding socialist and former Labour MP Stephen Pound and the barrister and alleged former Tory MP Jerry Hayes. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's the best news of the day. Polly Middlehurst is back with the news.
How kind, Jacob. Thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight is that the owner of Jaguar Land Rover is set to announce plans to build a new electric battery plant. The so-called Gigafactory in Somerset could create up to 14,000 jobs. Reports indicating initially the site will be near Bridgewater. Not yet known how much money the government offered Tata, that's the parent company, to secure the new factory. There was certainly competition from abroad as far as its siting was concerned. But Darren Jones, who chairs the Parliamentary Business Committee, said the government's subsidy package will need to be looked at. That just into us within the last few moments here on GB News. Now, also in the news today, the BBC's acting chairwoman has told a parliamentary committee that there was huge pressure on the corporation to name Hugh Edwards as the presenter caught up in recent controversy. The House of Lords committee also asked BBC Director General Tim Davie why the organisation didn't take allegations against its most highly paid news presenter more seriously and much sooner. The BBC boss confirmed that it was in touch with the mother who made the original serious allegation against Hugh Edwards, allegations later robustly denied by her son. GB News understands 450 migrants crossed the English Channel in 9 small boats today. The news comes as the first group of asylum seekers will be moved next week to a barge currently docked in Portland in Dorset. The Bibby Stockholm will be used to accommodate single male asylum seekers as part of the government's plan to reduce the cost of migrant hotels, which currently stands at over £6 million a day. Former Manchester United footballer and Wales manager Ryan Giggs says he's relieved at being cleared of domestic violence allegations after charges against him were dropped. The 49-year-old was due to stand trial for a second time, accused of controlling a coercive behaviour towards his ex-girlfriend, but lawyers withdrew the prosecution. Judge Hilary Manley directing he was not guilty on all 3 counts. Ryan Giggs had denied the offences and his previous trial ended last August with the jury failing to reach a verdict. The EU is sending firefighting planes to Greece as the country attempts to tackle wildfires due to an extreme summer heatwave being felt right across southern Europe. Spain, Italy and parts of the Balkans are also being hit with very high temperatures. The Greek Prime Minister is cutting short his trip to Brussels to oversee government activities as the fires rage. Smoke from the fires are so widespread they can be seen from space. And lastly, the first British passports bearing the title of King Charles III will start being issued this week. The post-Brexit dark blue travel documents read His Britannic Majesty. The last time that appeared on a British passport was during the reign of King George VI, the late Queen's father. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. You're with GB News, the People's Channel.
Today, the BBC Director General, Tim Davie, faced some fairly gentle questioning at the Culture Committee over the BBC's leadership of the Hugh Edwards scandal. But in truth, there's a much bigger story affecting the future of the BBC. Ministers are reportedly considering an official review of its funding model as new figures revealed licence fee holders revolt, with 500,000 failing to renew their licence in the last year alone. The BBC funding model is well known to be outdated and needs clear reform. The institution, one of many in the public sector infected by the contagious bureaucratic groupthink, needs to feel the wind of the free market, because the licence fee is a terrible comfort blanket. What do I mean by this? Well, it makes the BBC think that it doesn't need to earn its living, and it therefore has wasted this enormous asset. The BBC, historically, was one of the great global broadcasters and had an income to go with it. When we had 1, 2, 3, 4 channels, at that point the BBC had a completely dominant position. It was the company that could buy the sport. It was the company that could do the big drama. It was the company that had the budgets. But as more competition has become in, the BBC has stagnated. So in 2010, the BBC's income was £3.4 billion. Netflix had an income in 2010 of £1.6 billion. Today, The BBC is still only 5.7 billion against Netflix 23 billion. Netflix, which was a fraction of the BBC in 2010, is now 4 times the size of the BBC. And that's where the funding model is failing. Because instead of allowing the BBC to be one of the big global players, it has decayed and declined to being a relatively less successful regional player in a global market. But the licence fee has insulated the BBC from a feeling that it needed to earn its living and, of course, from you, its viewers. If it were to change its income source to go to advertising and subscriptions, then it would be more linked to the people who watch it. It would have to be more responsive to its customers, as other businesses are. And I think many of us would find this perfectly reasonable. I use the iPlayer quite a bit, but wouldn't it be fair to pay for it? I pay, after all, the subscription to watch Test match cricket. And the licence fee that has protected the BBC from commercial reality is what has allowed it to slip into the mentality of the blob and to take on the blob's view of the world politically. As we recall, the IEA conducted a study that revealed the BBC's anti-Brexit bias, with disproportionate numbers of Remainers joining its programmes. And if you don't believe me about the BBC's bias, just look at the number of senior presenters who've gone on to make left-wing podcasts. Perhaps you'll mail Mogg to tell me the great list of people who've gone off to right-wing podcasts. I will happily read them all out. And it's the BBC's funding model that has made it so unresponsive, but at the same point, the Reithian moral tone has collapsed under the weight of the Jimmy Savile scandal, the Cliff Richard scandal, when he was so appallingly treated, and now the events surrounding Hugh Edwards. The BBC is a national treasure. It will be sharpened and burnished by the winds of competition, but it will be snuffed out by the comfort blanket of the licence fee. As always, I want to hear from you. Don't forget to let me know what you think. Mail Mogg@gbnews.com. But now I can turn to my distinguished panel, the former Labour MP Stephen Pound and the very distinguished barrister and successful barrister, former Tory MP Jerry Hayes. Jerry, you've always been on the slightly left wing of the Conservative Party.
Yes.
Are you going to champion the BBC under its current model, or do you think it's right?
Not under its current model, but all this Hugh Edwards business, all this business of bias is catnip for the right wing of the Conservative Party, which I'm sure you're not a member, who actually want to defund the BBC. Throughout the world, they are respected as a news source. If you're in your bunker in Ukraine, you listen to the World Service because you believe it. Look, all of us who work for the BBC, and you've worked, Steve, as well, you know the hoops you have to jump through against bias. Now, one thing you will have in common with Jeremy Corbyn is that... Well, yeah, no, he does. He may not realise it yet, but you will in a minute, Jacob, and that is that you think the BBC is biased. You think they're the British Bolshevik corporation, whereas he thinks it's full of wicked Tories, so they must be doing something right. But the real question is...
So tell me, which of their presenters has gone off to do a right-wing podcast?
It doesn't really matter.
It's quite important, because that's the tone of the BBC.
No.
All the ones who've gone off to do left-wing podcasts.
Yes, but hang on. This channel is not exactly a left-wing.
But we don't have a huge number of people from the BBC. We've got the wonderful Michael Crick, who was once of the BBC.
Yes. But at the end of the day, the most important question, is the licence fee module the right way to do it? The answer is it's probably not, and we're going to have a look at it.
I think that's my main point, that the licence fee model is actually holding the BBC back, and therefore globally it's become less competitive, because whereas Netflix income has gone up, 15-fold.
Well, Netflix is actually plateauing at the present time.
It is now.
He doesn't do news either.
It's gone up 15-fold in 1,000 years.
There's a couple of important things here. I think you talked about the bracing winds of competition, and that's absolutely right. It'd be foolish to deny that. But look, the BBC's present charter expires in 2027. There's now talk about a review that's going to report, good heavens, very, very quickly, autumn next year, which will be just about in the middle of the election campaign. I think that there's a case to be made for a national no advertisement broadcaster, possibly on the radio. And I think what Jerry says about the World Service is very, very important. I've been there. It's not, you know, I don't spend much time in foxholes in Bakhmut or the southern Ukraine, but, you know, I spent a lot of time in Nigeria and other places where, you know, and certainly in Iran, where the World Service is crucial, absolutely vital. Of course. But look, we can no longer pretend...
But historically, that wasn't licence fee funded.
No, it's Foreign Office. The Foreign Office. Yeah,
funded,
yeah, the Foreign Office funded.
Cut the budget every
and,
year.
And I think the Foreign Office made a dreadful mistake about that. But look, the Reithian model, I mean, there was a fair deal of hypocrisy about Lord Reith too, as we...
Not half.
Life wasn't entirely up to snuff, was it?
Yeah, no, indeed he wasn't, but at least stuff meant something different in those days. But look, the reality is that the BBC in its present form is unsustainable. I think we all accept that. We could make a case for a sound broadcaster without advertisement as the national broadcaster. We need somebody in times of emergency and national disaster. There has to be, just the same as Churchill had in the 20s in the general strike, you have to have somebody who speaks for the nation. There has to be some sort of an organ there.
And Jerry, do you think the BBC is now trusted to speak for the nation? Because
no.
Has been...
Well, the BBC doesn't speak for the nation. That's not within its charter.
But that's what Stephen was saying.
Well, it does have 23 million people.
But
Jerry, 23 million people pay the licence fee. Yes. 23 million.
That's
down from 23.5 million.
It's
not a huge drop.
Meant to speak for the nation. It is meant to give the news impartially. That is the whole point. It's the news gathering which is the most important. It's the news gathering. And of course, all political parties, ever since I can remember, have always had a go at the BBC because, do you remember Norman Tebbit during the Falklands War? He had a go.
Libya, the raids on Libya when he got particularly upset and made a...
Oh, Falklands War as well. Falklands War as well.
He was party chairman at Libya.
Yes, that's right. Everyone has a go at the BBC. So they must be getting something right, don't you think?
No, can't we agree? The salaries of some of the BBC
It's dubious, but it's probably right.
Yeah, we throw the word obscene around, but, you know, when you're paying people, you know, over £1 million a year to present programmes on the television...
Well, Gary Lineker...
There's something seriously wrong there. I don't care what you say. There's something very, very seriously wrong.
Well, what puzzles me is they don't pay Jonathan Agnew the same as Mr Lineker, that surely cricket is of more interest, and if you're paying, say, much to a football commentator, the cricket commentators get at least the same. This must be inequalities.
I mean, John Arnott didn't even get his train fare paid from Alderney, or he used to complain. He had to use his old police pass. You know, so it's pretty rough. I mean, you know, entirely straightforward and honest way, I hasten to add. Yeah. But look, I think at the moment it is wrong. It's bloated, it's out of touch, and it is not succumbing, not responding to competition.
When you say out of touch, what do you mean?
I honestly think that if you have a look at who's making the weather in broadcasting in this country today, it's a much more feeling of openness and a debate and discussion. If you listen, I mean, I listen to Radio 4 quite often. It just seems to be very angry American women academics seem to be on over and over again. And I just don't think that they actually speak for that broad pattern of people. If 23 million people are buying the licence fee, do you think those 23 million people are actually happy with what they're getting?
Different argument.
I think they're buying it because they have to buy it.
Whoa. The job of the BBC is not to make people happy. The job of the BBC is to be impartial and give news.
A year or two ago, I forget exactly when, Mr Davey put a challenge saying you couldn't go a fortnight without using the BBC. I took this challenge. I found it extremely easy not to listen to the BBC, not look at its website, listen to a different radio station in the morning. It's not any longer something that everybody needs every day. No, and therefore the licence fee is unjust.
Well, the licence fee has got to be reviewed because the majority of young people, and I regard anyone under 60 as young, but the majority of young people, the sort of 20s, 30s, certainly the 60s, do not rely on any platform on the main news.
I think your point's important. People like Jack Domenio and Brian Raehead and people like that...
move on, unfortunately, but thank you to my panel. We ended up with some element of agreement. But coming up, it's one of the most shocking government scandals of modern times, the post office scandal. And its legacy remains as perfect. Plus, should we be more Spanish and back the motorist?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Bob says, the BBC is outmoded, overpaid presenters, low-quality programmes. They have sat back and relaxed in the way that all state agencies do. Cancel the licence fees and make it compete for its funding. It might just improve its performance without a safety net. And Margaret says, Jacob, we should defund the BBC. They're no longer impartial, and most people now use other channels such as GB News. Thank you, Margaret. And another viewer says, it's not the money, it's the compulsory element. But I notice nobody has mailed Mogg to tell me of an ex-BBC employee who's gone and set up a right-wing podcast. Please do, if you can think of one. The British Post Office scandal was a shocking miscarriage of justice, one of the most outrageous in our nation's history, resulting in over 700 sub-postmasters being wrongly prosecuted for fraud, theft and false accounting, owing to IT errors on the Horizon system. Following a number of court cases and campaigns, many of the victims of this error were compensated and convictions overturned, but others are still awaiting justice. Yesterday, the head of the inquiry into the scandal, Sir Wyn Williams, released a report criticising the schemes by which victims are remunerated for their troubles, describing the process as a patchwork quilt with some holes in it, and that his criticisms over the delays remain justified. Sadly, quite a number of those postmasters died before seeing justice done. My next guest is one of the victims of this shameful episode in our national life. Seema Misra was jailed for 15 months in 2010 in one of those wrongful convictions. This led to her being berated in the media, and she came close to taking her own life. Seema was pregnant at the time and gave birth still wearing her probation tag. She joins me now to give me her views on the latest development in this shocking story. Seema, thank you so much for coming in. The way you were treated is just so unbelievably outrageous. An innocent person, an IT fault, a pregnant lady, sentenced to 15 months in prison.
True.
And you can't have believed this could happen in this country.
Never ever thought of it. If it didn't happen to me, it was so difficult to believe that these things still happen here in UK.
And nobody thought that 700 sub-postmasters were being prosecuted in a relatively short time, one a week, when in the previous 20 years, there'd been 3 or 4 every year. And nobody thought to think that this increase meant there was something wrong with the system.
True, we've been told exact wording from the post office. Oh, Mrs. Mishra, we have so many post office. They're doing fine. It's just your post office you're having issue with.
And they knew that wasn't true.
They knew that.
So there are the lies, and then there's the cover-up.
That's it.
That makes it all so much worse.
That's true.
And then this thing that puzzles me, that the British state, when it makes a mistake, doesn't seem to want to put it right quickly. And you've had other similar scandals where errors are made. And we end up, in the infected blood scandal is a similar example, we end up covering up for long past governments when surely we should be getting on with it now.
Of course, yeah, we always say it's like a land of two laws. One law for common people like just me and you, and one other for the one in the authorities. So they can get away with the false accounting, we can't.
And tell me what you think should happen now. So Wyn Williams has come up with his report. You said to me a number of people have died who were sub-postmasters.
Yes, 62 postmasters been killed by post office. I would say they died. They've been killed, murdered by post office. They haven't seen the compensation. These are just the postmasters. We don't know how many family members of those postmasters are gone already. So these need to be put it right. They're just dragging on. They're just waiting to lose more and more postmasters to die out of this.
And do you know where this is coming from? Is it from the post office itself that doesn't want to settle these cases, or is it the government that isn't providing the money?
I can see there's like a blame game going on at the moment. It's not that difficult, you know. Like they have lawyers and lawyers. We know they have so many lawyers. They can sit down and get it sorted soon.
And some people have had payments. Is there a set payment that can be made? But how do you compensate for people being sent to prison?
True, there is no compensation for that. But at least they can put some figures, they ruin people's life.
Yes.
They said, we heard it in media so many times, we're going to put it to the people in the position where they should have been without the scandal. We are nowhere near.
But that's almost impossible to do, because it's not just the time you lose by being in prison, it's your reputation.
Of course, yeah.
And you had a respectable business and the respect of your community. And then suddenly all that was taken away.
We lost everything. We lost everything along with the kids' happiness as well. There's so many moments we couldn't spend with the kids. So it's like a torture. It's not just for the postmaster, it's for the whole family.
And that must have been such a strain on you and your family.
Of course,
when you were going through it.
It was a terrible time. It was a terrible time. I'm proud of my family, my husband and my kids, but I didn't want word to know that I'm their mum. It was like that. I was never telling everyone my full name. I didn't want them to go in Google that, oh, she's Seema Misra, she went to the prison.
Because you felt there was a stigma. And this was purely because an IT system failed.
Yeah, and the post office, they try to hide it.
And are you part of a group that's campaigning now to get this put right? And are doors being opened to you? Are you getting to see people within the relevant part of government?
There are so many groups going on, but we are together, definitely. We want proper compensation for each and every one of us sooner rather than later. They need to put a time scale. They need to put a time scale, not years and months. It needs to be done now.
And what about your own position? Have you received compensation?
No compensation. I received interim payment, but no compensation.
No compensation, even though you were sentenced to 15 months in prison?
No.
And when you were pregnant, you were wearing a probation tag.
They ruined each and every happy moment of our family.
It's such a terrible story. Why do you think there isn't a desire to put it right? I mean, I was briefly the minister responsible for this. And when I was responsible, the instruction I gave to the department was that this should be put right as quickly as possible. So where is the obstruction coming from?
I got no clue why this is happening. It's like a blaming game. It needs to be sorted. Somebody needs to, in authorities, to put a foot down and say, get it sorted. It's just an ego thing. I don't know, probably during my case, they wanted to protect Post Office Horizon name. That's why they let me go to the prison. So the system need to be placed, like somebody, whoever is a culprit, they need to be punished. They can't just roam around.
That's a very fair point. It's not just compensation. It's finding who covered this up who allowed this to happen, and making sure they are held to account.
And the main thing is just to show to the people that system does work in the country. Today is a post office, tomorrow will be another organisation. So we need a proper law in place that people in the authority shouldn't get away with it.
Because you said at the beginning there were two sets of justice. In this country, there should only be one set of justice, which we should all benefit from. There is a statement from the Post Office. We welcome Sir Wynn's interim report and share his view that victims of the Horizon scandal must be provided with full compensation fairly and consistently. This remains our priority. Well, I would say to them, get on with it. Thank you so much, Seema. You are so brave to come on, and I'm so grateful to have welcomed you. Coming up, as a new defence procurement inquiry is published, we'll be joined by Marc Francois, one of its members. Plus, should the government abolish ULEZ?
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GBNews forecast. It's been a damp day once again across many central areas. The rain, though, does ease overnight with clear spells emerging, but there will be further showers arriving on Wednesday. We've had a feature move through during Tuesday. That's pulling away into the North Sea at the moment and taking its rain with it, although it will take a while for eastern parts of the UK to be clear of rain and showers. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud remaining, but the clearest skies will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, albeit with a few showers into the northwest, and temperatures where we get the clear skies dipping into the low double figures, mid to high single figures. A milder night to come, though, in the south, 15 or 16 Celsius as we wake up on Wednesday, and still a lot of cloud around for eastern and central England, East Wales, and some showers. But more widely, into the afternoon, we're going to see a mix of sunny spells and showers. The heaviest downpours will be across eastern England, central and eastern Scotland. The driest weather will be towards Wales and the southwest, 22, possibly 23 Celsius in the south, 18, 19 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Fast forward to Thursday, and it's a bright start for many, a cool start to the day. But quite quickly we'll see the cloud build and we'll see showers developing once again. This time the heaviest downpours will be across central areas. A good chance of avoiding showers in some places and staying dry. Fewer showers on Friday before wetter weather arrives for the weekend.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission
of GB Newsers, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. There's still nobody can point out a right-wing ex-BBC broadcaster who's doing a podcast. Never mind. John says on the Post Office, the biggest problem is that our legal system failed at least 70 times. And James says, funding of BBC News, World Service, Radio 4, yes. Everything else, no. It was announced over the weekend that the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, will be standing down from the government at the apparently imminent reshuffle and will not stand for Parliament at the next election. Although in recent weeks he has lost out because of the anti-Anglo antics of US President Joseph Robinette Biden after he blocked the Prime Minister's bid to select him as the next NATO chief, the Defence Secretary has been a great success, one of the most respected members of the government, who leaves a bold and courageous legacy of support for Ukraine, while many of our allies dithered and delayed. Today, as the new Defence White Paper was released, Mr Wallace pledged to stick to the planned cut to the army, explaining that increasing its size would have meant sending troops into battle with pitchforks. So in his final stint of Secretary of State, he'll be pursuing an agenda of quality over quantity. But it just so happens that the Defence Procurement Inquiry, which was published yesterday, has found that the procurement system is highly bureaucratic, overly stratified and far too ponderous, along with many other unfavourable adjectives. Now more than ever is our procurement of the utmost importance as we shift into the darkness of a multipolar international order. But I'm now joined by the man himself, Marc Francois, a member of the Defence Equipment Subcommittee, who has been involved with the report, and I've just quoted one bit of it. That's the fundamental thing, isn't it? Ponderous, inconsistent approach, poor accountability, and institutionally averse to individual responsibility.
Yes, I chaired the subcommittee inquiry, Jacob, and the reason this matters so much is we now spend about £50 billion a year on our defence, and approximately half of that money goes on procuring equipment for our armed forces and or supporting that equipment when it's in service. So we're talking about half the defence budget. And we have to get this right because there's now a war in Ukraine. And as Jens Stoltenberg, the respected Secretary-General of NATO, said prior to Christmas, it is possible that NATO, including ourselves, could get dragged in. So there's now a sense of urgency about fixing this that perhaps wasn't there before.
It's a huge amount of money, as you say, and other countries do it better. I was particularly struck by the Type 26 frigates, where Japan managed to get similar ships within a third of the time of our commissioning and getting our ships. Why? Why can the Japanese do it so much more efficiently?
Well, the Type 26 programme will eventually produce a world-class frigate. And the reason we're frustrated on the committee is the ship is so good we want it in service earlier. There's been a lot of bureaucracy. It was partly affected by COVID, but they had COVID in Japan too. And the management of that programme by Defence Equipment and Support has left a great deal to be desired.
And is this part of the issue? You've got a bit on it later in the paper about over-specification. So you say with the frigate it would be absolute world-beating when it's ready, but do we therefore allow the best to become the enemy of the good?
We absolutely do. We go into that in great detail here. By the way...
There's a great phrase, which I can't imagine, exquisite procurement.
Yes, and
tell people, what is exquisite procurement?
What that means is when you're designing a new piece of military equipment, you want it to be so perfect, so capable, that you make it so expensive, so exquisite, you can only afford very few of them, whether they be warships or combat aircraft or tanks. So you end up spending a fortune, more and more money, on fewer and fewer bits of kit. And that's a cycle that we need to break out of.
And is there an element of Treasury rules that leads to mistaken decision-making? You've got the example of the wedge tail, where 5 orders were placed. It was then reduced to 3, but almost exactly the same cost for the 5. Was that a Treasury-derived rule?
It was a ministerial decision, and it was a poor one. And so the wedge tail is an eye in the sky. It's a flying radar station, if you want to think of it like that. And we were going to buy 5 for about £2.1 billion, and we're now going to pay to buy 3 for just under £2 billion, about £1.89 billion. So even by simple math, that's not very good value for money. And one of the reasons that we still have to pay so much is because we bought 5 radars. So we've had to pay, we're on the hook for 5 radars, which is a lot of the cost of the aircraft, but we're now only going to buy 3 airframes and put them into service, 2 of which, by the way, used to be in service for Chinese airlines.
So this is simply failing to read the contract properly and making a decision that you think will save you more money than in the end it does.
Yes, but there's some good news. We brought this thing out actually on Sunday. Today, the new Defence White Paper has a section on acquisition reform. We made 22 recommendations, some of them quite punchy. The section on acquisition reform in today's defence paper effectively almost accepts a number of those recommendations. It's so similar. So you will know from the House of Commons it often takes months or years from a select committee report to a government department to change the policy. We somehow seem to have done it in 48 hours, so I'm claiming a world record.
Well, that's very impressive. I mean, it never normally happens that quickly. On the Treasury issue, annualisation is a point you make in the report.
Yes.
That everything has to be done according to that year's available cash. Yes. And that means contracts get spread out over an elongated time span, which puts up the cost and leads to delays. What can be done about that when inevitably there has to be annual accounting?
Well, we're spending taxpayers' money, so it has to be spent appropriately and carefully. But having to land the budget every year on a sixpence, as the saying has it, means that sometimes you end up playing accounting games which don't make sense operationally or militarily. So what we're arguing is, on the one hand, you must account for public money, but we shouldn't be obsessed in the way that we are, with having to make everything balance every year. You should be able to spread that over several years. You'd save the taxpayer money and you get the kit earlier.
Now, I want to change tack a bit on the chairman of your committee, who's been off to Afghanistan and seems to be working for the Afghanistan Tourist Board. I wonder if we can look at this clip.
All that's happened here since 9/11, this is a very different country indeed. It feels different now that the Taliban have returned to power.
Well, it may be hard to believe, but security has vastly improved, corruption is down, and the opium trade has all but disappeared. Pylons distribute electricity to the cities. Solar panels are now everywhere, powering irrigation pumps, allowing more crops to grow.
Doesn't that seem to you extraordinary for the chairman of the Defence Select Committee to go to Afghanistan and say everything is much better now the Taliban are running it, and quite offensive to the families of those soldiers who laid down their lives?
We lost over 450 soldiers in Afghanistan, and thousands suffered life-changing injuries. The chairman of the committee is entitled to his view, his personal view, but in some articles associated with that bizarre video, he keeps using the title of chairman of the Defence Committee. Many of us on the committee are very annoyed by this, and I stood up in the Commons, having spoken to a number of members of the committee earlier today, and basically said, not in our name. We don't support what he has done. I think we think it's foolish and ill-advised, and if he wants to carry on being the chairman of this committee, he probably wants to moderate his behaviour, and he certainly shouldn't keep using the title of chairman when he is putting forward personal and, I would argue, bizarre views.
Well, particularly as the video doesn't talk about the Taliban's brutal behaviour to people who served the British when we were there, who are still in hiding, still living in fear of their lives, and obviously many of them have tried to escape and some have escaped to the UK. It doesn't go into the details of women's education and the clamp down on that. It just makes it look as if the Taliban's marvellous, and why were we there in the first place?
The Taliban are still trying to hunt down and kill Afghan citizens who assisted NATO while they were in Afghanistan.
You wouldn't note that from the video?
No, you wouldn't. And your point about female education is also very well made. And Tobias poses the question, why didn't NATO do certain things while NATO was helping in Afghanistan? Well, the simpler answer is because the Taliban was trying to kill NATO soldiers morning, noon and night. NATO could have done much more for the people of Afghanistan if they weren't involved in a conflict. So it seems to me bizarre, and I use the word deliberately, to blame NATO for not achieving some of those things when they were at war effectively with the Taliban.
Well, I hope perhaps Tobias will want to come on and tell us what he thinks about that. But you can watch his clip on Twitter and his articles to get his side of the story. But thank you very much to Mark. Coming up, should the Conservative government follow the lead of the Spanish Conservatives and their pro-motorist policies?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your mail Moggs. Anna says, the post office scandal is a perfect example of why the GB News Don't Kill Cash campaign is so important. Endless things can go wrong with technology, but cash isn't subject to such frightening prospects. Thank you to everyone at GB News. And Alan says, ex-BBC right-wing presenter Michael Portillo? Oh, I think that's slightly cheating, but never mind. It's a good effort. Anyway, this Sunday, Spain's ruling socialist coalition government will be challenged in a general election, with the latest polling suggesting a conservative coalition is set to replace it. The two parties in question, the People's Party and the Vox Party, already have local governance coalitions across the country and have pledged to undo much of the tyrannical war waged on motorists across the country. But if such a coalition were to rule the central government, the measures seen on a local level could be brought in at the national level. But here in this country, the Conservative government should learn these lessons and implement policies that are popular. It's well within the remit of the government to abolish the ULEZ altogether, and it should do so as soon as possible. Now, I continue to be joined by my brilliant panel, the former Labour MP Stephen Pound and the former Tory MP Jerry Hayes. Stephen, shouldn't governments do popular things? The Labour Party is finding itself all over the place in arguments over ULEZ.
Sometimes governments have to do unpopular things, as you well know, and sometimes governments have to actually be true to themselves and not necessarily, follow the Gadarene swine or say, wait for me, I'm your leader. But the situation in Spain is much more interesting, I think, with at the moment the PP and Vox together, they're not going to hit 176, which is what you need for a majority in Cortes, but in Valladolid, they are actually in collaboration together at the present time. But two things are going to make a huge difference, I think, before Sunday. The first is Spain's on fire. And so if you actually have a look in the northwest and the northeast, where Vox and Santiago Abascal, the leader of that, is making these very, very vituperative statements, compare that with what's happening in Andalusia, and people in the south are saying, look, hang on, hold on a second, maybe there is something to this global warming. But the other thing is it's a very unlikely combination of those two, because Vox is only, I think it was formed in about 2013. It's a very, very right-wing party, where PP is much more of a traditionalist one.
It's been going for years. But Jerry, to come to the motoring issue, most voters are motorists or belong to families that have motorists in them, and yet consistently governments whack them, and with the ULEZ thing, it's absolutely ridiculous. The only power to implement ULEZ is because Parliament passed a law to give it to the Mayor of London, which could be repealed in 24 hours.
Yes. Which is interesting, because you've got the Uxbridge by-election coming across. And this could be a by-election which actually, surprise, surprise, the Tories could win. It's not going to be on a national
We've got to be careful what we say.
We've got to be very careful. And there are other people who are standing, list of candidates, exactly right. But putting it as generality, there's a lot of people who are very concerned about it. And I just wonder what's going to happen.
Well, and there are ULEZs taking place all over the country. They've got one in Bath, Bristol. They've got one in Oxford. There are other places.
Well, the one in Oxford has kind of hit a brick wall. I mean, certainly the people were saying to me the other day, ULEZ equals you lose, because there was certainly a very, very strong feeling against it. But look, I think if you just look around the world, what's happening in the world today, you cannot deny that something pretty dramatic is happening to the
but 12 quid to drive into London.
Well, I'm sorry.
12 quid.
Jerry,
look,
it's a long way from Greece having 50...
Actually, the ULEZs aren't about that.
Yeah.
They're not about carbon dioxide.
They're about air quality.
They're about
air quality, precisely.
So they're not affecting global warming.
No, but it's about air quality. And I think when you actually have a look at what the situation is in central London, there's a very, very powerful case to be made for it. In outer London, where I'm from, and where the place you just mentioned that we shall not mention is, it's a different matter altogether. But I think the real problem here is the lack of consultation, the lack of buy-in. The people I've been speaking to don't feel that they own this. And that comes back to your main point about whose views are they reflecting.
And isn't this interesting? Because three of us are all politicians, and what we want to do is to win votes.
Whoa.
Well, you've semi-retired.
No, you used to refuse to accept votes from people.
What we want to do, Jacob, as politicians, is the right thing for the people of this country.
That's right.
Not just to win votes.
And that's why
people politics is in such a damn mess.
Is one of their great freedoms and their great liberties, and has enormous economic benefits. And yet we always seem to be bashing the poor on motorists, taking more money out of them through petrol taxes, diesel taxes, road fund licence taxes, ULEZ taxes.
What Steve was saying is quite interesting, because at the end of the day, in London, in urban areas, there's a problem with the quality of the air. The Times has been running pieces on this for years and years and years. So surely, I'm not saying I agree with ULEZ, but just being sort of devil's advocate, surely politicians have got to say, well, it's not a good idea that there are kids who are dying because they live next to roads.
All of that's absolutely fair enough, But there are a number of things. First of all, it was government policy that made the air quality worse by encouraging diesels, and then you're punishing the people who don't want the government said, which is
one of the reasons why the Conservative government gave Boris Johnson, the mayor, the right to actually bring in ULEZ. But you remember when George Young was Transport Minister, we had a huge problem with lead in petrol. And there was a proven fact that there was a correlation between lead in petrol and the effect on people's brains, particularly around the A40. And there was a book written called Leadville, about the Western Avenue. People said, oh, you can't stop taking lead out of petrol because our cars won't run it, the motorbike.
But technology improved.
Yes, I know, but we managed
we
to
took lead out of petrol.
We took lead because we had better technology. And that was...
Well, is ULEZ compliant vehicles better technology?
The petrol wasn't good enough without lead in it. But let's go on to the civil service.
The civil service.
Because it's one, again, living up to its reputation of entitledness and otherness. It's just been revealed that the average retirement age of the 500,000-strong force is 3 years below the private sector. With the latest alarming but sadly unsurprisingly revelations, is it time to reassess the exorbitantly generous gold-plated pensions on offer that see employer contributions in excess of 6 times that of the private sector?
Yeah, Jacob, I well remember that glorious spring day in 1997 when Tony Blair gathered all the new MPs. He said, there's a couple of things I want to tell you. First of all, up until now, MPs don't have to serve on juries. I'm going to stop that. MPs don't get speeding fines. I'm going to stop that. But the third thing is, you all get a non-contributory pension of your best of your last 5 years as MPs. And we all said, do we really? Oh, glad to hear that. He said, and I'm going to stop that. The civil service has still got that situation. It's unconscionable. Now, look, what's going to happen is by 2048, I think the retirement age will be 70. The civil service will probably be excluded from that. I don't know how they get away with that. The thing about it's the job security you have in the civils, and to a certain extent local government, should in many ways not be matched by the security of having a stonking great gold-plated pension.
Well, I think one of the answers to the current pay disputes is to reduce the terms of the pension and give people money now.
No.
No?
No, because that's bad management of finances.
That was Liberal policy in 2010.
When I
was
ventilated from the House of Commons, I had the opportunity of taking my pension when I was 65, or taking
When will you be 65, Jay?
I'm 70. I'm just, embalmed beautifully, but pickled in alcohol. But no. Oh, I've forgotten the question. Oh, yeah. you say civil service pensions. Yeah. Look, you, when you were a minister, had some great people who were working for you.
Wonderful people.
And the sort of people who, in industry, could have commanded far more money than they were earning in your department.
All right.
We want to encourage the best.
We want the best. That's
but don't choke their mouths with gold.
Thank you to my panel, which is the best, but that's all from us. Up next, it's another best, Professor Sir Daniel Wootton. Dan, what's coming up on your show?
Jacob, good evening to you. All of our brilliant Tuesday regulars tonight. Nigel Farage on the Coots scandal, Megyn Kelly on the latest on Trump and Biden, and Tom Bauer with exclusive revelations about the Sussexes. Lots more too.
How can there be any more revelations about the Sussexes? You managed to find the most exciting things coming up week after week. It's worth bearing in mind that Sussex was one of the last places to convert to Christianity. Nonetheless, that's all coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the sunshine is lovely in Somerset, as always.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's been a damp day once again across many central areas. The rain, though, does ease overnight with clear spells emerging, but there will be further showers arriving on Wednesday. We've had a feature move through during Tuesday. That's pulling away into the North Sea at the moment and taking its rain with it, although it will take a while for eastern parts of the UK to be clear of rain and showers. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud remaining, but the clearest skies will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, albeit with a few showers into the northwest, and temperatures where we get the clear skies dipping into the low double figures